Hey guys, it's I'm a Talkling here. I've been meaning to do a guide video for about a year or so now, and I've kind of never gone around to it. But now that I am 1K LP and I believe I'm top 100, I think now is a good time if ever. So yeah, besides that, let's just get right into it. And I'm just gonna start off by talking about it, matchup tier lists, when to go TP versus Ignite, etc. And right off the bat, this is just my opinion. Against a lot of good players I faced, I think this is a pretty definitive tier list. So right off the bat, we have like the ban and unplayable tier. I think, in my opinion, versus if you're ever against like a good Kennen, Jace, Urgot, etc., these Shen into these champs is just completely unplayable. There's almost no room for counterplay, and they'll always just like, kind of like poke you out of lane or just zone you off the wave, etc. As you move down the list, it obviously gets a lot easier. I think a lot of the champions of the hard tier, while it is a very hard matchup, there is a little bit of room for counterplay. Aurora and Riven used to be like really bad matchups for Shen, but ever since they got nerfed, I think it's at least a little bit more playable, and you can win if you're better. Same with Gwen too. Hard after 6 are basically, it's a very small like tier here, but any champions that kind of like outscale you level 6, like have really insane 1v1 ults, like Alawi or Yorick, or have the ability to just like run at you, like Tryndamere, or Kale becomes like a ranged champion at level 6. It can be hard if you don't have a lead into them. So that's why they kind of have like a tier between hard and skill. As for skill, I think a lot of these matchups, especially in high elo, are very, very dependent whether or not they're going to be hard or easy, depending on how well you as a Shen can play into them. So for example, regarding like Renekton, for example, if you can W Renekton's W and Power W, for example, it's actually a pretty easy matchup. And same thing kind of goes the opposite, like same thing goes for like Gangplank. If you can auto his barrels without him being able to proc it, it's not that bad of a matchup. If not, then it becomes a lot harder because that's how you kind of lose trades. As for like the Fiora and Jax and like Poppy, it's kind of dependent on how well the enemy plays. If you play pretty well and the enemy plays pretty well, like Jax or Fiora for example, I think it's actually a losing matchup for Shen, but that's what I mean by it's kind of a skill matchup. And then I think there are a lot of actually like free or easy matchups for Shen, but most of them are not meta right now. At least at the time of recording this video. I don't think Nasus or like Yone or Camille is like, they're not played that often, and even if they are, unless they're facing like really, really, really good players, it should be a pretty easy matchup. But besides that, yeah, so we're gonna talk about going TP versus Ignite next. I think TP is mostly used for a lot of the harder matchups. You can also kind of bring TP into certain matchups if you're uncomfortable with them. That's kind of why I have the either or preference thing here, is that if you're not comfortable with a matchup into like Riven, for example, and you're kind of scared, or you don't know how much damage Riven can actually do, I think it's okay to bring TP, but if you're confident, it's better to go Ignite, obviously, right? So TP, it's like more or less, I think you have most of the hard or unplayable matchups up here. I put Renekton and GP up there just because you're not really gonna find too many kills on them, like not too many openings. Renekton is, you can look for a kill on Renekton early with Ignite, for example, but I think TP is almost always better played because Renekton has a lot of shove potential and can sustain off a wave, right? Same with like Gragas. You can't really ever kill Gragas. He's kind of just a brick wall. But yeah, it's kind of a rationalization for TP. As for Ignite, these are kind of matchups where Shen is either favored or you have to outscale the opponent. Like the opponent outscales you, and you have to take Ignite to win lane. So examples of that are Kayle, Gwen, Fiora, Mordekaiser, Yorick, Yasuo, Yone, etc. Nasus too. If these champs do not get punished early, down the line at like 2, maybe 3 items, Shen cannot match them in the side lane later. So that's kind of why I emphasize bringing Ignite to kind of like push that advantage, get some sort of lead, and then when 2 or 3 items comes by, you'll be ahead enough to be able to at least match them or like kind of take over the game from there, right? And then yeah, like I said before, either or preference is kind of just dependent on how comfortable you are in the matchup. For example, Jax, if you're very confident, like I said earlier, I think Jax is a good example of a matchup where it's one of my favorite matchups because it's all about skill, right? So if you are confident into a Jax, I think taking Knight's perfectly fine. But if you are kind of iffy on the matchup, I think going TP just to ensure that if you take like 1 or 2 bad trades, you can still play lane. I think that's still fine too. It's same thing with like Riven, same thing with like Darius as well. If you're scared of a Darius or you know that Darius is kind of good, taking TP is fine. But if you're confident thinking you can outplay Darius, Ignite's obviously a lot better for kill potential. But yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts. If you have any other questions regarding like the tier list or like when to take TP versus Ignite, you can always just put it in the comment section below. I'll try to answer it. But yeah, besides that, I'm just gonna move into the runes here. All right, so in regards to Shen's rune page, I think the main rune page with like Grasp is almost always gonna be what you're gonna take. I know Hail Blade's got buffed recently, but I don't think Hail Blade's top lane is very viable. I think if you're going like for like Shen jungle or like Shen support, I could kind of see the niche, but it's just not that good in top lane, to be honest. I think Grasp is just too consistent and too good of a rune to kind of pass up on. So I think for the most part, Shen's rune page is more or less the same. Bone plating versus Second Wind. If you guys haven't seen my other guide from like 2 seasons ago, I think I have like a screenshot there of when to take bone plating versus Second Wind, and it heavily depends on the matchup. It's more or less the same if you guys want to go check that video out too. But basically, long story short, if the enemy champion has a lot of like burst, or their combos, trading patterns, etc. are more burst reliant as opposed to poke, it's better to go bone plating, obviously. So champs like Jax, Irelia, Riven, Urgot, Aatrox, etc. I think it's better to go bone plating. In terms of like for Second Wind, it's kind of just any champion that can proc bone plating too easily for it to be worth it. So Gnar, Jace, most range matchups basically. Darius has a bleed, so he's gonna proc the bone plating really easily. And yeah, that's about it. I think you can kind of for matchups that are kind of like you're not too sure. For like example like Renekton, I think it's okay to go either, but it's kind of just up to preference. But besides that, you're always gonna go Grasp plus Shield Bash, and then yeah, this is dependent. I wouldn't go on flinching. It's a bit, or sorry, conditioning. It's a bit too greedy on Shen. I think Shen's early game is a bit, you can kind of exploit it if you're really good. So I think you kind of need one of these to make it past the early game basically. As for the last row, I think unflinching, even though it got buffed, it's really not that good anymore. I think overgrowth is a lot better because your passive E and ult all scale with health. I've seen some team comps, or like, yeah, some team comps go revitalize. I think that only works if you have like 2-ish enchanters on your team. So what I mean by that is that if you have like a Soraka and like an Ivern, I think it's okay to go revitalize, but it's very conditional. So I'd say for the most part, I just always go overgrowth here. Now for the second page is kind of where you can kind of have some diversity here. I know the stock standard page for Shen is cheap shot or sudden impact plus ultimate hunter. I've used this rune setup. It's really solid. Don't get me wrong. The only issue I have with this is that if you're playing to win lane, you don't have the surprise factor of approach velocity, which I'll get into later. But yeah, if you are new to Shen, or you kind of want to learn Shen, or you just want to climb with him, I think this is probably the best rune page for you. Either sudden impact or cheap shot, whichever one. And yeah, I'll talk about the other one in just a second. But for this, the bottom rune set, whatever you want to call it, I go attack speed, health, health. I've seen some people go attack speed or adaptive force, health, health. I think that's okay. It's more of a preference thing. I think the attack speed versus adaptive force is just dependent on whether or not you're comfortable with like CSing on Shen, especially under tower. I've grown accustomed to kind of the attack speed rune, so that's why I go it, but adaptive force is also okay. And yeah, besides that, I have the second rune page here, and this is the one I prefer because, especially in the current meta right now. So everything's basically the same, except the second rune page right here. It is the inspiration rune page as opposed to the domination one. So what this rune page gives is it gives you biscuits and approach velocity. And I've had a lot of clips where, especially into more mobile champs, approach velocity can get you that enough movement speed to get onto them. Of course, you don't have the damage from the domination tree, so you don't have cheap shot ultimate hunter, so your burst is a little bit worse. But as a trade-off, you can get maybe like 1 or 2 more autos in with your empowered Q with the slow, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's like a pretty good trade-off. And especially because a lot of top laners that I faced, they don't really expect approach velocity. So you can probably just sneak in an extra auto or 2, and that can actually matter across the course of the lane, right? The other rune I go here is Biscuits. I think you can also go Magical Footwear, but I think ever since Biscuits got buffed to where the mana got removed and it just gives straight up health, it's a lot better on Shen. Because again, Shen does scale off health, so it's already a bonus. And there's a lot of damage top lane. So I think if you're ever low, especially if you might get dove, the Biscuits can actually save your life, because they actually restore a lot of health when you're low. As for other rune pages, I've tried Axiom Arcanist and like Transcendence or something like this. It's not really that good. I don't recommend it. This is basically just a worse Ultimate Hunter, and the shielding you get from it is almost it's basically negligible. And then yeah, as for Yellow Tree, I don't really like it either. I know I've seen some people go like Legend Haste and like Cut Down. Not really my preference. So I think Shen really only has 2 valuable rune pages right now, which is the red tree right here, and then the light blue tree right here. That's about it. Besides that, I think I'll probably talk about items next. All right, so for items here, I think it's pretty straightforward, although I think a lot of people do struggle with, you know, what to build situationally or what items you should be rushing. I have a lot of questions about like whether or not to go Titanic or what build I go. So I think it's best if I kind of answer it here. So stock standard start is going to be D-Shield and a pot. I know some people have said like D-Blade, that's more of a for fun item. I don't really recommend it. I think D-Shield just gives you a lot more sustain and regen over the course of laning phase. So I'd always go D-Shield as opposed to something like D-Blade. As for ideal for SPAC, you're always going to be looking for Bambi Cinder and or Bramble Vest if you need anti-heal versus champs like Fiora, Olaf, Aatrox, etc. that are more like drain tanks. If you do have Ignite though, getting a anti-heal isn't always necessary unless you know the enemy champion constantly heals in combat. So if a champion like let's just say Fiora for example, she only heals off vitals occasionally, right? Until she gets Ravenous, anti-heal isn't like a super big factor, and her healing scales throughout the game. So you don't have to waste early gold on anti-heal if you already have Ignite. And you can stall it out for a bit later. But yeah, this is your ideal first back. Bambi Cinder and then anti-heal if needed. Just be wary if you do this, you're going to be stalling out your first item for a while because you're kind of going more accessory items to be able to play lane as Shen, right? You kind of need wave clear Shen, you get Bambi Cinder. If you need anti-heal, you gotta waste 800 gold to pay the tax. It is what it is. Shen is a very low econ tank, but it's kind of what you have to deal with. As for your core, I kind of have to give credit to Xpetu because I actually was not a believer of Deadman's or Hollow Radiance up until he made a post on Twitter. I used to actually build like especially last season, I used to be building like Heartsteel and like Titanic for most, if not, or for some, if not most of my games. But ever since I started playing with like Deadman's Tech and Deadman's Plate and Hollow Radiance, I think this is a really strong core. I'll go into explaining a bit later, but essentially a lot of people ask why Deadman's is so good on Shen. I think it gives Shen a lot of what he needs. It gives him health, it gives him damage due to the passive, it gives him armor, and it gives him movement speed. And I think movement speed is a very underrated stat on Shen because it allows you to reposition your Q and make use of approach velocity. So it's kind of like a twofer if you think of it like that. As for Hollow Radiance, I would almost always build this over Sunfire unless the enemy team has quite literally 5 AD champs, because the Hollow Radiance wave clear is so much better than Sunfire. Sunfire is in such a bad state right now that I would almost never build it. And a bonus is, let's just say the enemy team comp is like 4 AD, 1 AP. If you go Deadman's into Hollow Radiance, you don't have to really build MR unless that 1 AP damage dealer is fed. And if they are fed, you can't really do much anyways. But just getting like a bit of an item that gives you wave clear and a little bit MR makes it so you don't really have to itemize into 1 AP threats until like a lot later. You used to be able to go like Anathema's Chains, but ever since that got removed, you can't really do that anymore, right? But yeah, this is kind of the core. If you're against an AP matchup top, like Mord, Gwen, I'm trying to think of some others, Aurora, etc., you should go Hollow Radiance first, finish Bambi's into Hollow Radiance, and then go Deadman's afterwards. If you're against an AD top, vice versa, finish Bambi's first, go Deadman's, and then go Hollow Radiance afterwards. And then your third item is heavily dependent on the enemy team comp. So if they're mostly AP, you should go Hollow Radiance, Deadman's, and then you go Force of Nature next. And then you can go items like conditionally Spirit Visage, but I'll get into that later. But these items right here are kind of your core. So you're looking at, whenever you hit your third item, you're looking at Boots, D-Shield, whenever you sell it, Deadman's, and Hollow Radiance. Your third item should be Iceborne if the enemy team comp is mostly AD and you don't need crit reduction. Randuin's third if you need crit reduction, if the enemy team has like Yasuo, Yone, Kindred, Jinx, Draven, etc. If the enemy team has a lot of crits, go Randuin's third. And if the enemy team is mostly AP, I would go Force of Nature third. I think a lot of people undervalue this item. I've had a lot of people asking me about like Recurrent and stuff like that. I think Recurrent's situationally very good, but I think especially with the dot abilities being like dot mages being so strong right now, building items like Leandries, I think Force of Nature gets a lot of value over the course of like the entire game. And like I said again, it also gives you moon speed, which is a very good stat on Shen. And then we have Knight's Vow as the other conditional item you can build third here. I would only go this third if you have carries to play off of. What I mean is that if you are 2 items and you're not really like super far ahead, you're not in a position to really carry that well, or you're not like the main star, like the main character of the game, I think it's okay to go Knight's Vow for your carries. So if you have a champ like Xin Zhao or like Hecarim, any like kind of drain tanking, like good bruiser jungler, Lilia for example as well, I think it's good to go with this item. It's very cheap too, so it does help with Shen's relatively poor gold income for items. So yeah. And then for last items, you can always just kind of go whatever you didn't go third item. So if the enemy team comp is mostly AD heavy, you can go Deadman's, Hollow Radiance, Steel Caps, Iceborne, Randuin's, and then if you need anti-heal, go like Thornmail for example, right? If the enemy team is mostly AP, you go Force of Nature third. After Hollow Radiance, you go Merc Treads, and then you can go something like maybe like Abyssal Mask or like Recurrent if you need the MR. I do have some conditional items. For example, like I said earlier, Visage is a good conditional item against mostly AP comps, but that's only if you have another enchanter on your team, maybe like a Karma or like a Seraphine, and then you want to round out your build. Fourth or fifth item plus boots, it's gonna be like Jax Show. I think this is a really good tank item because fights are relatively long with Shen because of your passive, because of your W. You can kind of stall out time for Jax Show to stack up. I think it's a very good item to finish off your build. As for boot options, there's kind of really only 3 I'd say right now. I don't really recommend Ionian boots because I think Shen gets a lot of value out of these 3 boot purchases, but I can kind of see why you would build it. It's okay, it's just not my preference. I prefer the other boots. It's pretty self-explanatory. Enemy team has a lot of CC or is AP heavy, you go Merc Treads. If they're 80 heavy or auto attack focused, you go Steel Caps. And then I'd like to go Swifties if the conditions aren't really met for these 2 boots, because the slow resist you get with this plus Deadman's kind of makes it so you're running across the map and you can dodge a lot easier. And slows aren't as effective against you, which is really important for Shen when you're like trying to run out of a fight or like trying to get away from the enemy team. The move speed is very undervalued, and I think it's super important. As for conditionally good items, I've had a lot of people asking me about Titanic, and I think Titanic is okay, but you just have to be a bit wary of how expensive it is and how bad the components are, because Titanic is 3,300 gold as opposed to Deadman's 2,900. And like I said earlier, Shen is very limited on gold. You're almost not going to ever be getting like plates unless you're already winning lane. And if you're already winning lane, you shouldn't really need Titanic anyways. I think especially in the current meta too, where mobility is so important. If you go Titanic, the enemy team can mostly the enemy team, a lot of champions can't just like run away from you, right? And if you only have Titanic, you can't really catch up to them, right? Shen doesn't have like 20 million dashes like Riven, for example. So long story short, I think Titanic is conditionally good. If I were to build it, you would obviously build it as opposed to Hollow Radiance here. So you can maybe go like Deadman's Titanic or Titanic into MR if you're against an AP heavy team instead of Hollow Radiance, because you don't really want to double dip into both wave clear items, because you're only getting Hollow Radiance mostly for the wave clear, not for the stats it gives. As for Titanic, like I said, it is very expensive, so just be wary if you do build it. Another issue is sitting on Tiamat for the wave clear is really bad because you're paying 1,200 gold for, I believe, 20 AD that Shen can't even use to scale his abilities in his kit, right? So yeah, you are relatively weak until you get Titanic, but once you do get Titanic, if you are ahead, you will be hitting like a truck. So I think it is okay. It would replace like Hollow Radiance here, and then you could go maybe like Iceborne third if you want to catch up to them. Next up on the conditional items, there is Visage. Like I said earlier, I think Visage is only good if you have enchanters on your team. So Ivern, Soraka, Sona, Seraphine, Senna, etc. If you have those champs and you are ahead and the enemy team comp does have a good amount of magic damage, I think Visage can give you a lot of value in that case. And then next we have Sundered Sky. This is kind of in in combination with Titanic Hydra for a more of like a bruiser style Shen build, I think it's okay. It just is not as effective as the higher you climb, it gets less effective. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're playing, if you get counterpicked or you're playing in like a super high elo lobby, Shen, you're not playing Shen to be more of a fighter, you're playing Shen to be more of a straight frontline tank and kind of like a peeler to protect your carries, right? So if that's the case, you don't really need to go Titanic Sundered Sky. That's more of like a for fun build, or if you want to carry like lower elo games. And then last up, we have Thornmail as a more conditional item too. I think I've seen a lot of people finish Thornmail on Shen, and I don't think it's really worth it, because if you only need anti-heal, it's better just sit on Bramble for like the whole game and only build it into Thornmail as like a last item. It's just like the stats it gives and the Thorns passive, whatever you want to call it, it's just not that, it's really not that good, I guess. It's kind of more of like a waste of gold, and you're better off just spending the gold on better tank items. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think if you guys want to look at some of my builds, you can go to my op.gg and kind of look at it there. For like situationally, what I build in some cases as opposed to others. But yeah, this is kind of like just a straightforward guide on what to build for your first couple items. Of course, every game is going to be different, so you kind of have to adjust accordingly. But once you get kind of like a rhythm going of what to build, it should be pretty straightforward, right? I build mostly like the same items every game, and only sometimes kind of like adjust it just depending on how well I'm doing, what the enemy team comp is, how well my team is doing, etc. But yeah, I think nailing Shen's items is super important for climbing. So I thought I'd show you some cases of, or kind of my thought process and what I decide to build some games. So for example, this game, I'm versus a Ornn, and the enemy team comp has 2 AP threats with Elise and Akali, and 2 AD threats with Caitlyn and Bel'Veth, and 1 mixed damage threat with Ornn, right? So I went the stock standard build of Deadman's Hollow Radiance, and then I went Rook Treads here because they actually have like a decent amount of CC, and it's good against, the MR you get from this item is good against Ornn, Akali, and Elise. And there, like I said, there's also CC with Ornn, Ornn Slow, Elise, Cocoon, Caitlyn Traps, etc. And then because they have a lot of mixed damage, I went Jax Show third. Usually you want to go this later, but because of this exact specific game where the damage is so split between magic and physical, I think Jax Show third here is okay. And I'll go look into another game here. So next there is my 8-4-8 game, where I'm versus a Garen, Rengar, Talia, Lucian, and Nami. So you kind of look here, they have 3 AD threats, and Nami's more of an enchanter, not like an Elise who's more of a burst support mage, whatever you want to call it. This is mostly just 3 AD, 1 AP. So this is kind of what I meant earlier with Hollow Radiance. Building 40 MR here is good enough just for the Talia for now. I mean, she does have 17 kills, yes, but normally this is not going to happen. All you need is Hollow Radiance, and then you can itemize into more MR later if it's really needed. But early, like for early game, 40 MR is kind of really all you need. And then I went with the Deadman's Steel Caps because they have 3 auto attackers. Rengar and Lucian are heavy auto attackers. Garen is kind of an auto attacker. And then I'm building Randuins here because they crit, right? Garen crits, Rengar crits, Lucian crits. It's triple crit, so Randuins gets a lot of value here. And then here, for example, this is kind of like a good example of when to build Force of Nature third. So I'm versus an Azir top versus a Rammus, Braum, and Echo. They only have 1 auto attacker, which is Vayne. This is a loss, but it is what it is. I had Anivia jungle. But yeah, so I went Hollow Radiance, Deadman's, 2 core items, Rook Treads here because they have a lot of CC and because of the armor, MR. And then I went Force of Nature third here because they have their triple AP topside. So getting Force of Nature gets you an insane amount of value. But that's just kind of like a couple examples of when to go which items. Let me try to find an item here with, or sorry, a game here with Iceborne. So here I'm versus Jace, Sion, Anivia, Vayne, and Poppy. This is a very, like I said earlier, this is a very hard matchup for Shen. But I did go the same core, Deadman's Hollow Radiance, and then I went Iceborne third because you're facing a lot of mobile champs, right? Jace has the ability to kind of cut you out. Same with Vayne, same with Anivia, same with Poppy. These are very hard champions to stick onto, so you kind of need to go Iceborne for that. Just to be able to like stick onto them and become a threat. Because if you don't get Iceborne, especially later on, you will almost never hit a taunt versus, or you will rarely ever hit a taunt and be able to chase them down without Iceborne Gauntlet. There's too much mobility in the game right now, so I think Iceborne in like games like this where enemy team comp has more range champs and more mobile champs is a good idea. But yeah, that's kind of it for situational builds, I guess, or like my thought process of when to build what. And yeah, besides that, I think that's it for the guide. And you guys can just watch the gameplay afterwards, just to see the items in action and how I lane.
with honor. Press on.
But yeah, that's kind of it for the guide. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys have any comments or questions, you can always just follow my Twitch. I stream every day there. If you guys want to discuss it in the YouTube comment section or Discord, I also have those linked in the description below. But yeah, besides that, I'm just gonna have some gameplay here to show you guys how I play lane. And yeah, besides that, I'll see you guys in the next video, or I'll see you on stream, alright?